Thank you everyone for joining us and welcome to the Urban Opportunity City Business Collaboration for Sustainable Solutions. My name is Madeline Smith and I'm the Program Manager for MIT Denmark, part of MISTI at MIT. I want to start by thanking those who made this webinar possible, including our presenters, Jorn Abdelgaard and Susanna Toll, our moderator, Alpha Jakob Arsano, Danfoss, City of Copenhagen, MIT Sustainable Design Lab, and the Confederation of Danish Industry. A few quick practical matters before we begin. Video and microphones will remain disabled for attendees for the duration of the webinar, but we encourage you to engage with us via the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. We will aim to answer as many of your questions as possible during the webinar, but do feel free to send any follow-up questions to me at mit-denmark@mit.edu. Lastly, a reminder that this webinar is being recorded to share with those who were unable to make it today. Now I want to introduce our moderator. Alpha Jakob Arsano is a PhD candidate in architecture and building technology, conducting research at MIT's Sustainable Design Lab about maximizing passive building strategies in different climatic conditions. Previously an academic fellow at Transolar Energy Technik, a climate engineering consultancy in Stuttgart, Germany, Arsano also interned at the architectural firm Allman Sattler Wapner in Munich. She earned a BS in architecture from the Ethiopian Institute of Architecture, Building Construction and City Development. She earned an SM from the MIT School of Architecture and Planning. Arsano developed a digital tool, Climate Plus, to promote building design that uses less air conditioning and consumes less energy in pursuit of a more sustainable and healthier environment. This tool can be used by builders and architects in the early stages of design. Thank you and welcome, Alpha.
I'm a PhD candidate doing some research at the Sustainable Design Lab, which sits at the Department of Architecture at MIT. Our lab does a variation of projects. Now we have a lot of projects ongoing regarding urban energy modeling, where we are identifying effective sustainable building strategies to improve the performance of the whole neighborhood. And to that end, there are tools being built like the UMI, Urban Modeling Interface. And that has been a unique opportunity to work with cities like Boston, Chicago, and Lisbon to model those cities and also collaborate with their city administration. This extended to daylighting, urban agriculture as well. There's a lot of work in teaching. And maybe a great example to that is the online course that's being launched, which aims to reach out to so many people around the globe. We had close to 15,000 learners participating and learning about sustainable building design. And today I was so happy to be invited to be part of this platform where we talk about effective, successful collaboration between the city and the business. I would start by giving you an overview of the agenda, and I would introduce our first presenter representing the city of Copenhagen, Jorn Abdelgaard, who would give us a background for sustainability in Denmark, the public-private projects, background for the Nordhavn project, and overview of collaboration and goals from the city perspective. So he would have 10 minutes of presentation followed by 5 minutes for Q&A, just directed to Jorn. And then we would have Susanna Toll, who is our second presenter today, 10 minutes presentation, should give us an overview of collaboration and goals. From the company perspective, should tell us about technical aspects and innovation solutions, challenges, and how feedback is received, representing Danfoss. That would be followed by 5 minutes of Q&A. Then we'd have open discussion for about 15 to 20 minutes. Please send us all your questions at any point during the conversation, and we would use the time, and then we would wrap up and conclude for today's webinar. So I'd like to introduce our first presenter, representing the city of Copenhagen, Jorn Abdelgaard. He is a project director for the 2025 carbon neutral strategy and plan for the city of Copenhagen. Jorn has worked on several projects in Denmark, Nordic countries, and internationally for companies, organizations, and governmental administration within the energy and environment area. This includes energy planning and strategies, green growth, climate change, sustainability, the Kyoto mechanisms, the Nordic power market, renewable energy, energy efficiency research and development, building regulations and investments in the energy sector. He also has comprehensive experience from work within international organizations such as the United Nations, EU, IEA, the Nordic Council of Ministers, and the BARZEC. Please welcome Jorn to the first presentation. Such an impressive background. Looking forward for your presentation, Jorn.
Jorn, you're still muted.
Yes, so thank you for this opportunity to tell you more about Copenhagen and what we're doing on climate change, and also in the perspective of sustainability. A little bit about Copenhagen. Now I just have to, okay. A city, we are a small, big city, and with a little bit more than 600,000 inhabitants, but we're growing like many other cities. We are part of a capital region of 1.8, and what we call Greater Copenhagen is part of southern part of Sweden, and also the rest of Zealand, the island where Copenhagen is located. Just a little bit about
Jorn, would you like to make it presentation mode so that we can see the slide speaker?
Yeah, okay. Yep. Great, thank you.
Perfect, thank you.
Why are we working as a small city to become carbon neutral? First of all, because when we look around in the world, we see growth of population, and not least in people are living in cities. They will move to cities in the coming years. And we also see a growing middle class. And we also see that there will be a lot of investments in infrastructure. New Climate Economy Commission have estimated that to $90 trillion in the next 15 years. And also that if those investments in energy, transport, and so on, they are not sustainable, forget everything about climate change. What we're doing in Copenhagen is that we have created a process that is really based on a learning process with 3 roadmaps. We are just working on the roadmap for 21 to 2025, hoping that will be adopted in the City Council over the summer. But also a learning process, and that is really important because we have to learn on the way. We are running around 50, 60 projects in the city and with different kind of partners. I'll also say more about that. We are working in 4 work streams to make it simple: energy consumption, energy production, mobility, and city administration. And if you look at the figures, first of all, it is reduction in energy production. So it's also quite a lot a structural change. It's a transformation of the basic structure. So we are not working with consumption-based emission, not yet. That will come later on, hopefully. But a precondition for doing that is really a close cooperation between the city, business, and research institutions, universities. And it's a part, as I said, about sustainability development in Copenhagen. We have the aim to be a lively city, but also with a livability high on the agenda. Known for biking, but also a good city life. So that's a important part of what we're doing. So a lot of the process until now has also been that we have involved the partners, business and universities, in knowledge sharing on projects, not least in the first 4 years of the plan. And we make annual conferences with a lot of international partners also as part of that. with 450 participants for 1 or 1.5 days. And that had really been part of the basic. We also, the way we made the plan was also involved business in developing 22 business plans. That was the base for that. And by that, they learned what we want to do, and we learned a lot of what was the situation around on different matter issues that we want to work with. A few examples. I'll not go in detail on the plan, but say a little bit more. Not that much on Energy Lab Nordhavn because Susanna will do that, but just a few things from our point of view. We see an energy system in Denmark and also to some extent in the Nordic countries where we'll have much more wind. And by that, we will also need much more flexibility in the system. Wind will be part of district heating. In Copenhagen, 99% of all buildings in Copenhagen are covered by district heating. So we need to know more about how we can make flexibility, and the project was about that. Susanna will say more on that. Another part is energy consumption in buildings. It's a difficult sector, and that is worldwide known. We have developed a partnership called Energy Lead, now with 43 partners. First of all, facility management, but also big building owners in Copenhagen area. And they are covering around 20% of the building stock in Copenhagen. And the aim is 40 to 50 partners in 2022 or 2020. And they have also taken upon themselves a voluntary agreement to reduce energy consumption by 3% per year. We are not fully there, but close to. First of all, benchmarking, networking, knowledge sharing, communication, and branding for companies, but also a closed room to have knowledge sharing. So Chatham House rules and so on. We have worked with Hyundai in Korea for some years on hydrogen cars for 6 years. It was a 4-year program, but that was in fact a prototype on a hydrogen car. And we have 20 cars in our fleet of cars. And we are still developing on different kinds of technical issues, both on electric cars and hydrogen cars. And also with our partners, for example, loading facilities and so on. So it's an example, another way to work with partners. One of the new activities in construction machines, there's a lot of CO2 emissions from construction machines, and also CO2, NOx and particulate matters, and also noise. And we have developed a different kind of partnerships also with other cities, because we as a city are too small really to make the market. So we are working together with Stockholm and Oslo, and now also other cities. But we are now in our own fleet have a budget for making them fossil free on heavy machines. And we have started up to 10 pilot projects on construction and building sites in Copenhagen to test different kind of solutions, but also procurement processes related to that. We have waste to energy in Denmark and also in Copenhagen. This is the new facility. It's in fact a ski slope on the top, so it's also called Copenhagen Hill. But what we are doing is also when you want to look into possibilities to take out CO2 from the chimney and have carbon capture and hopefully also utilization in the future of that, because we think it's important that we go that way. Also, when we look globally, it's a technology that we have to develop. When we look at some of the barriers and also obstacles where we are now, it's first of all mobility. So we are now working on trying to develop a new road plan for Copenhagen to reduce the amount of cars, but also in fact different kind of other mobility solutions related to that. That will be a process that will go to the city council next year. Also issues related to carbon capture and other things. Also the road, non-road machines. So that will be part of the road to 2025. We are working in C40. It's a cooperation of major cities around the world, both the big ones, but also innovative cities. We are one of them. But we have also what we call Copenhagen Solution to Go, where we have a cooperation agreement with New York City, Washington, and in fact also Boston. And the one with New York and Washington is working very well. And we have also with Beijing, and that is working quite well. We have a lot of delegations to Copenhagen, not for the last 3-4 months, and we don't know how that will develop further on, but hopefully we will see also that, and maybe also new methodologies. To finalize, I'll say what is really the next step for what we're doing. We have now a decision that we have to look into post 2025. What will be the future in a climate plan for that? So we will start that in the autumn this year. And as I said, the future energy system is one of the issues, heat pumps. We have a lot of discussions about biomass. We're using biomass in our utility companies and also wind, geothermal energy to put that into the system. And not least also what will be future mobility. I think no of us really know what will happen in 15, 20 years on that. And finally, we suppose that we also will start the work on consumption-based emissions and what can a city do on that. First of all, related to buildings, but also food, but that could also be other topics, and not least awareness about our carbon footprint as citizens in Copenhagen. So that will be my introduction to what we do in Copenhagen. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Warren. Your timing is perfect. You're right on time. We're waiting for questions to come in because we have 5 minutes just for quick questions. Maybe until we get those questions, I can direct one question which was already asked by our participant. The first question is, what are the challenges of including these kind of goals, profit business goals for sustainability projects, where we might not actually see the profit right immediately?
Yeah, I agree on that. And that is, of course, one of the preconditions that we have to work with. So that's also the reason why we work a lot with partnership. And by that, I'll say more bottom up with companies that really are on the forefront of these issues, where they also see benefit of being part of development of their new solutions. So it's also part of their development. When we take construction machines as an example, I think most of you know Volvo. They are quite big also on construction machines, and we have a close cooperation with them on hopefully testing some of their first series of dumpers in Copenhagen in 2 years from now. So just an example. So we have a lot of that kind of project where we test different kind of solutions in different kind of setups. So it's also processes, energy management, for example. And by that also making business, for example, for Danfoss, but also other companies. It could also be for companies outside Denmark.
Nice, thank you. Maybe in relation to that, I would like to pick one question from participants by Salma Sharaf. How do you encourage private corporations to partner with the city and work towards sustainability goals?
First of all, to make it a good opportunity for them to be part of a process where they also can develop solutions, and by that also develop solutions that can be business for them outside Denmark. If you take a company like Danfoss, but it could also be other companies, maybe 95% of their production is export. But so it's important to have a playground where they can test in an area where they know regulation, market conditions and so on, and use that and test the technical solutions. It can also be related to involvement of possible consumers in the future. So there can be quite a lot of different kind of partnerships and development.
That's wonderful, very nice. We have 2 more questions by Gilbert and by Patricia. Maybe we'll get back to them during the discussion time so that I can introduce Susanne, and we have the second presentation. Thank you, Jorn, for your time. Susanne Toll, our second presenter, is the Senior Manager of Public Affairs in Danfoss AS Heating Segment. Susanne joined Danfoss in 2016, and today she leads the public and industry affairs work in Danfoss Heating Segment. She holds a master's degree in European Studies and has studied in Germany, Denmark, and France. Susanne follows and analyzes climate and energy policies and supports Danfoss business in developing positions on relevant political and industry issues. Together with partners and industry associations, Danfoss Heating advocates for energy efficient holistic solutions to achieve the energy transition with a focus on efficient and smart buildings. There's also a focus on district energy to provide sustainable heating and cooling to growing cities. Danfoss is an international company with headquarters in Denmark and is dedicated to engineering solutions for energy efficient and climate friendly world. So help me welcome Susanne, our second presenter. Thank you, Susanne.
Thanks, and I will also share my screen, just a second. Do you see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, and I would go into presentation mode.
Perfect.
Yes. But first of all, thanks a lot, Alpha, for the introduction, and hello to everyone. I'm looking forward to the questions and comments that you will have. I will spend the next 10 minutes or so on talking about how district energy or district heating and cooling is a solution that can help cities to become more sustainable and just better places to live, and how we as a company do cooperate with cities, but also other stakeholders in order to implement sustainable solutions like district energy. And as Jörn already said, one of the examples is this Energy Lab Nordhavn that you also see here on the slides, and I also have a couple of more. But before I deep dive into district energy, let me just say a few words about Danfoss for the context. Danfoss is an international company. We are headquartered in Denmark. It's actually not very far away from the farm where our founder developed the first innovative solutions. And today we have almost 28,000 employees all over the world. What Danfoss does is we develop and produce solutions for more energy efficiency, and that we do in all kinds of sectors. So you see some pictures here on the slide as examples in the construction industry, in buildings, in energy production and supply, in commercial activities, transport, and so on. And what the motivation behind this or the aspiration is that we, with our engineering, really want to provide solutions that help build a better and greener future. And in line with that, we are also committed to the UN Sustainable Development Goals, especially to the 4 that you see here on the slide. So clean water, clean energy, sustainable cities, and responsible consumption and production. And well, one solution to meet especially these goals 7 and 11 is district energy, district heating and cooling. And one of the reasons why we are so passionate about this area and really eager to develop solutions for sustainable heating and cooling, well, you see the 2 of the reasons here on the slide. The figures are for Europe, but they are, I think, valid for many regions globally. Today in Europe, we actually use around 30% of all the energy we consume just to heat our buildings. so almost 1/3 of all the energy just for heating buildings, while at the same time, most of that energy is coming from fossil fuels, mostly from gas and oil. So if we want to tackle climate change and if we want to make our cities more sustainable, then we need to find a solution to decarbonize heating and cooling. And one of those solutions is district energy. I don't assume that all of you know what district energy is, so I will just spend a minute or two on explaining that. So district energy is basically a network of pipes that distribute hot or cold water from an energy source to buildings to heat or cool down these buildings. So instead of having like a gas boiler in the basement of your building, you have a citywide or district-wide heating system. And the big advantage of having such an infrastructure is that you can plug in almost any energy source that you have locally available. So you can have, for example, the heat from power production. You can use waste or excess heat from industry and data centers, and also, of course, integrate renewable sources like geothermal, like solar, thermal, biomass, and as Jörn also mentioned, even the electricity from wind or solar, and thus even use the district energy network to kind of balance your electricity grid. District energy is in Denmark a very well-known and used solution. It's around 60%, I think, of the heat demand that is covered by district heating. And it's really a key element of the Danish energy system and of Denmark's strategy to become carbon neutral. But okay, maybe enough theory. Let's move to the concrete examples. And the one that I want to focus on is this energy lab, Nordhavn. Nordhavn is a district in Copenhagen, a newly built district. As you can see here on the slide, all the buildings look quite modern. This energy lab Nordhavn is a cooperation of a lot of stakeholders in Denmark, in the city, that are cooperating with the goal of developing and demonstrating solutions on how a city can move to a more sustainable energy system. And you see some of the partners here on the slide. It's the city, it's local energy companies, it's also the university, the Danish Technical University, and it's a range of companies like ABB and also us, Danfoss. And maybe just also to come back to a question that was just asked before, how the city gets companies like Danfoss to cooperate or to participate in projects like this. I mean, for us, I think it's very attractive that the city is in a situation where they can actually bring together all these partners, like the university, like other companies, to cooperate. I mean, we alone would not be able to do such an energy lab Nordhavn scale project, for example. So for us, this is a really attractive offering, if I can say so. And yeah, and of course, as a project like this, Jörn said it, they are also part of Copenhagen's ambition to become carbon neutral by 2025. And I won't go into much detail about all the technology that we are using here, but I just want to give you some examples to illustrate a bit how also this cooperation with the other partners works. So one of the main goals of this energy lab in Nordhavn is to show how you can really integrate, how we can integrate different sectors in order to achieve higher efficiency of the overall energy system. So how we integrate, for example, the electricity grid, the heating grid, cooling, buildings, industry, transport, to use the synergies between the sectors and thus optimize the energy use. For example, here in Nordhavn, we are recovering, so actually utilizing the waste heat from the refrigeration system of a supermarket to heat the buildings in the neighborhood. Instead of, usually in the supermarket, the heat that is produced just blown away, goes away. So we're doing that. We are also using the electricity from wind when there is an overproduction. We use the electricity to produce heat and then use the heat in district heating or store it in thermal storage. And we also having some projects around smart buildings, so where we use smart management or smart monitoring and management in buildings to optimize the consumption there, and to even kind of use the buildings as active players of the energy system. So for example, using them as storage as well during demand response, and so on. And this is Nordhavn. It's really an exciting place. So if or when you come to Denmark, I can only recommend you to visit it. It's very inspiring. And just to show you some other examples also, because I saw there was already a question about to Danfoss if we are, as an international company, also engaging in other countries than Denmark, and yes, we are. So here are some examples. We are also part of the UN District Energy in Cities initiative, which is an initiative led by the UN, where they bring together a lot of stakeholders from the district energy sector, and then they help cities and municipalities all over the world, especially in development countries, to develop the right framework for district heating and to implement concrete projects. Another example is Project Zero. That's in Denmark, actually. It's in the region where Danfoss is headquartered. And there the region has the aim to become carbon neutral by 2029. And they have also set up this public-private partnership in order to bring together all the stakeholders from the region to help achieve that goal. And then you just see some more examples of cities all over the world where we are working bilaterally with cities to implement district energy, but also other solutions in e-mobility, for example, or water or industry, all kinds. That was it from my side. So I'm looking forward to questions and comments.
Thank you, Susanna. You're also right on time. Wonderful.
Thanks, and Germans.
Wonderful. We have a few minutes just to get questions connected to your presentation. I think one question came in right now for you, Susanna. It says Europe uses, it's by Patricia Arnold, Europe uses 30% of all energy for building, heating and cooling, and 75% of it comes from fossil fuels. And what are the percentages for Danfoss heating and cooling and fossil fuel usage?
You mean how much the company uses?
Maybe for your projects, I think.
Yeah.
Compared to the larger statistics.
Yes, yeah. So when we have a project with district energy, I mean, the share of fossil fuels in district energy can vary, of course, because as I said, you can use a lot of different sources. In Denmark, for example, they have a lot of very sustainable district energy networks. So there, I think the share of renewable energy in the networks is around 60%, and they are, of course, also working on getting that to 100%. Sorry, and that's of course something that when we do projects, we cannot always influence what the energy source is, because that's up to the local municipality or city to decide. But we always underline, of course, that that's the benefit of having something like district energy, that you should make use of the renewable or excess heat sources that you have locally. I hope that answered the question. Otherwise, maybe you can just write it again, or yeah.
Sure. Maybe there's time for one more question, slightly different than the energy use. There's one question saying, so how do you get citizens or populations get involved in these types of projects, and what support or feedback is required from the people? Maybe you can answer it, Susanna, and then maybe we can give the chance for Jorn as well, and then we can move on to the bigger discussion.
Yes, I think it's rather a question for Jörn, but I can just say from a technology point of view, it's really important that people are on board, and that's also one of the reasons that we engage in projects like that, where we actually can experiment a bit or see how people react. Especially when you talk about technology in buildings, it's really important to know how people will actually use that technology, because you can have the best technology. If people don't use it, you will not have any energy savings or other benefits.
Mm-hmm.
If I should add to that,
Sure.
it is one of the challenges, that's for sure, because there's also a lot of regulation with to save to safeguard personal information. So in fact, we need more or less a personal agreement from the building owner or apartment owner that we can get that data and use that data. Otherwise, we can need aggregate data for building. So, but where it's not possible to see exactly what will be the consumption for one specific tenant. But it is important, as Susanna said, also to understand energy consumption and also how we can better regulate. That is one of the issues in the flexible heat market, where we can use, as Susanna also said, that where we can use the terminal power in a building as part of the flexibility and the storage. And by that, we also need to have more information about the exact consumption in a building. So we need an allowance to that. But then you have a market model where the individual consumers can be part of that and also have some benefits. But we have learning from Nordhavn that where it's possible, in fact, to heat a building up, for example, overnight when we have cheap energy, and then take it out maybe from 6 in the morning to 9, 10, and then you use the heat from the terminal power in the building as the heating part, and then go in again from 9, 10. Just an example. So we are developing that in other parts of Copenhagen for the time being, because we can share peak load capacity and so on, and that's quite expensive.
Right. And maybe if you reflect on how welcoming the citizens or the inhabitants in the cities are for these kinds of collaboration, because this sounds like a new approach compared to previous years, where you also involve the permission of the occupants to collaborate with the city and regulate the energy use.
I think what we have learned, at least from Nordhavn, is a quite positive response, and also to the first area where we are developing now with, I think, around 6,000-7,000 apart. There will also be benefits for the consumers, because they get some cheap energy, or at least cheaper heat by that, and so it's also an economic case, and they are part of development of a more sustainable city.
Thank you. Wonderful. We have one more question, perhaps related to the technology. Susanne could speak to that. Jörn, feel free to reflect on it as well. So the question is from Patricia again. She's asking, do you use reversible heat pumps where district heating and cooling may not be feasible?
Yes, so I think in order to decarbonize, to transition to a sustainable energy system, we will need a lot of different solutions. So what we in general say, you could say as a rule of thumb maybe, is that in urban areas where you have high density of heat demand, district heating and cooling is often a very good solution. It depends, of course, also on the local conditions, what energy sources you have, and so on. And then when you go a bit more outside of urban areas, rural areas, then you will probably have something like heat pumps, so individual solutions. just because, you know, if you have a very low heat density, then maybe the investment in a district heating grid is not really paying off if you need to connect a few houses that are very far apart. So yes, of course, we support or somehow produce components of almost all kinds of solutions that can somehow contribute to more sustainability. Yeah, there's never like a magic solution or a silver bullet.
That's wonderful. We have one question that's probably directly for Jorn regarding the use of data, consumer data. What data beyond consumer data do you look at in order to plan and set city goals and goals for the industry? And how do you handle proprietary data and data privacy?
As I said before, there's a lot of regulation about the using data, and so data privacy is important. So we need allowance from the individual consumer to use the data. And there's some possibilities in doing it other ways, but that is the principle. But it is important for making the plan to have a really good understanding of consumption, both heat, electricity, and water, for that sake, to understand what is really the possibilities to develop also new sustainable solutions in the city. And by that also efficient solution for the company to sell in the global market. We are lucky in Denmark that we have some quite big companies that are working in that area. Danfoss is one. Danfoss is working with pumps. Rockwool with insulation, and they are quite active in also related to energy consumption in buildings, and also in developing new solutions. So that has been really the backbone for a lot of companies or for a lot of projects in Denmark.
Mm-hmm. And maybe to add to that, it's also part of my experience when there are so many research projects in collaboration with universities or other research labs. Sometimes there is a need for a huge database to really analyze and get back with some new ideas. How do you deal with those questions? Do you do those kinds of collaboration where you hand over the user's data to another party which is working with you, particularly for research purposes?
Yeah, I don't know how it is exactly in US, but I think in Europe, and at least in Denmark, it is that if you're doing a research project, it is much easier to get data, but you also have to be sure that you have privacy and that it's not public data. But it's easier to get those data if it's a research project. So that is for several reasons. Also, one reason to have a university as partner in the project can be, frankly, and we also did that in the project Nordhavn, and some of the private companies benefit from that. That was PhD and postdocs that made project where the companies could benefit from those results. And in fact, in the development, as part of the project phase, also had access to the data. Now the project is it's not fully completed yet, but the biggest part of the project has been finished last year, and but the one that Danfoss is, or part of what Danfoss is doing, is still working, but it's normally to do work with that.
Mm-hmm. Wonderful. Maybe let me get back to our first question by Gilbert. It could be mostly directed towards you, but Susanna, it's open to you as well. I'm interested in the future of the tree canopy in the city and why trees are needed. It says in Cambridge, we have lost 18% of tree canopy since 2009, and some argue that it's needed to favor density, and eventually we will have less cars, so it's okay. Others argue that trees and gardens are needed for mental health in addition to climate change. How do your plans reflect on this?
I fully agree with that. I think we all know that the trees and green areas are also a quite important health and mental health issue. We have a plan to have 100,000 new trees in Copenhagen. So the biomass we're using is not local biomass. We have not the amount of biomass not in Denmark at all for what we're using in Copenhagen. So it's imported biomass. It's a sustainable biomass. First of all, from neighboring countries, the Nordic countries, Baltic Sea region, but also from abroad, and be sure that it's part of a sustainable forest management. So it's rest product from that or from the tree industry. That's the simplest answer to that. But we are really aware of having a green city.
Great. Do you, by any chance, know the green coverage at the moment, perhaps in Copenhagen?
In Copenhagen, no, I have to be honest. I'm not. I could find it, but yeah.
I can imagine the green areas in the parks.
Yeah.
That are sufficient for residents.
Yeah. The city is not that big in square kilometers as such, so it's relatively dense. But we have parks and so on, and then we have an area at an island south of or southern part of the city where there's a lot of green areas.
Great. So maybe this question goes to both of you. It's a question by Rohil Verma. It says, what are the biggest obstacles that you face in such initiatives? Are they cost-oriented, change aversion, or something else?
I would say it's a combination. Sometimes it's a political issue for several reasons. Sometimes it costs, but as I said before, it's important that we also make the processes in a way so we can see that we have hopefully a solution on the other side of the project where we also have cheaper solutions. That is in fact one of the aim of the climate plan in Copenhagen, that it will not in average be more expensive for citizens, and at the same time also create green growth. So that's really the mandate that I got 10 years ago, almost.
Yeah, I'd say from a business perspective, maybe the biggest obstacle to these projects is that they sometimes can take a long time. So a long time from when you start until you see some results. And it's when you are spending money and resources in a private company, you always need to explain what is the impact actually of this. And then you can imagine when sometimes projects take a long time, or when they simply take a long time, it's a bit difficult sometimes to make a commitment to that. And then another barrier, and I'm now not talking necessarily about Denmark, more in general about these public-private partnerships or projects like Nordhavn, or this one with the UN that we're doing. It's often lack of awareness and knowledge locally, so that you then in some countries don't necessarily find the right partners to work with, or you need to, and then you end up being 5 companies from Denmark, but no local engagement because you didn't find the right partners locally. And the third one is often regulation. Especially when you do something like this energy Lab Nordhavn, where you want to maybe do something innovative, demonstrate something that has not been done in the country, you often will have some regulatory barriers. And there it's great when countries have solutions or provisions like that when you do something for demonstration or research, that you can be exempted, for example, from certain regulation that then doesn't apply. So you can just innovate and experiment in a certain area for a certain time. But otherwise, yes, regulation is also often a barrier.
Maybe in connection to that, let me add one more question by Patricia. I mean, as Danfoss is really working internationally in so many countries, maybe perhaps you have few projects in developing countries as well, and how do you tackle challenges obtaining data in those kinds of contexts? Outside of Europe, or you might be doing some projects in developing countries, it could be in Asia or Africa or Latin America. Mm-hmm. In those kinds of projects, do you have any challenges of obtaining data for your project?
Data, that I must say, I don't know. I'm happy to ask some colleagues that are directly involved on a more technical level. Right. But I think in general, when it's about data collection, especially of private people, I would say that it's probably the hardest in Europe because we have. And as a citizen, I think that's quite good. We have very strict rules about the use of personal data that other countries not necessarily have. Yeah, but I can check. Yeah,
sure, that's completely understandable. And maybe a question for Jorn. Another question by Patricia: does Denmark or Copenhagen have an energy digital twin, or are they looking at a mobility digital twin?
It depends a little bit about what you mean by digital twin, but we are doing a lot of digital projects. Mm-hmm. First of all, together with very much in a European context with all European cities, and on mobility. I would say that we are looking at solutions around in the world where they have been successful in reducing the amount of cars. I would say at least in part of the city. So we are very much looking at, for example, that can be congestion charging and so on, but we're also looking at, for example, the city of Ghent in Belgium, where they have made the transport islands, a concept where there's only one road into the island, and it's not possible to drive from one island to another. So that kind of solutions, but also still developing solutions for bikes, and that is really important part of that, and not least part of the change of the city. The city of Copenhagen has also had a lot of industry areas in the harbor area. That's not the case anymore. It's offices, apartments, and so on. So better solutions, infrastructure solutions with bridges over the harbor only for bikers and pedestrians, and make that infrastructure easier also to suburbs. But first of all, solutions where we can reduce the number of cars. That is really the most prominent challenge for the time being. So we are looking around in the world for that.
Mm-hmm. Wonderful. Maybe let me give Susanna one more technical question. Because we were talking about district systems for both heating and cooling. I'm just wondering what the cooling demand is around there. We know it's heating dominated mostly, where you have, as you mentioned, 30% of the building energy use is heating. So how do you deal with that, and how do you integrate passive strategies, say natural ventilation or using the building performance to offset your cooling heating demand? Do you also consider those aspects in the overall picture of reducing energy use?
Okay, I see there were several questions in there. So on passive building design, that's not something that we do. I mean, we have heating and cooling technology that can go into the building. We don't directly work with passive design. On heating, cooling demand, I mean, that depends a lot on the region, so where you are in the world, right? So in Europe, I mean, clearly, and the demand for heating is much higher. But even in Europe, we see also an increase in cooling demand, especially in offices. And then you have regions like Asia Pacific, like India, like South America, where I think the International Energy Agency predicts that the demand for cooling will skyrocket. And if we would want to cover this cooling demand with the solutions that we are using today, the electricity, you cannot provide the electricity that would be necessary to provide cooling to all these people. Because, you know, in these countries, as the economies develop, people earn more money, more people will have also enough money to buy an air conditioning, for example. And that will have a huge impact on energy consumption and on sustainability. So in these countries, we really need to find solutions that are more sustainable. District cooling can be one of them. Maybe just more efficient air conditioning can be another. But cooling is, I think, something that is until now quite underestimated. We have already fought for quite a time to get more attention to heating. And I think the next step is really tackling cooling, especially in these regions.
Thank you, Susanne. I think we have only 2 minutes left. Maybe let me just ask one question and we end with that. We had a few more questions in there, but maybe we can pass it to you later. I think this is a nice concluding question. Maybe it can be addressed by Jorn. How close is Copenhagen from their 2025 goal? And what still needs to be done? Especially, what are the highest emitting sectors, and what do you think is the most effective way, policy, technology, or combination of reducing emissions?
We are with the latest opening of a biomass plant in Copenhagen this year. We will be down close to 70%. So what is really the rest and the highest emitting sector will be transport. First of all, there's still plastic in our waste to energy plan, so we are working quite a lot on that. And there was in fact a new national agreement on waste to energy today, with a lot of more focus on plastic. And then we have different kind of sectors, for example, construction machines and that kind of things, where we have different kind of projects running. So I would say where we really are looking into is, can we find the new solutions on mobility? Can we get some kind of agreement on carbon capture? And then we have some wind project in the sea outside Copenhagen, where we expect to have a more, at least the background for taking a decision on that next year. And if we are lucky and successful on that, then I think we will be also in the target by the 31st of December 2025.
Wonderful. That's a very positive note to end today's webinar. We're I think we're getting past our time. Thank you so much for everyone joining from Denmark, from Copenhagen. Have a good evening. And everyone joining from Boston or Cambridge, have a good afternoon. Thank you, Madeline. Thank you, Susanna. Thank you, Jorn. Have a wonderful day.
Thank you so much.
You too.
Thank you everyone for joining, and thank you to our panelists and to Alpha as well. Have a great rest of your day.